That was a first. Thanks. I think I've never been described as a braai before, so thank you for that. So braais are really important to us. So I think it's a really great compliment. Thank you for that so much, Steph. Good morning. It's really good to be here with you this morning. I'm sorry that I have a bit of a Barry White thing happening with my voice. I was in Durban on holidays for a little while, where there's a very dramatic change of temperature when you come from, the Indian Ocean in Africa to Amsterdam. So please forgive me if I sound a little husky. Some people like it, others not so much. So a couple of things that I'm going to cover with you today very quickly is this whole idea of Africa rising, because we can see that people are more and more interested in Africa as a destination because of the appeal and the allure that it has, but also this idea of the trends that are shaping travel internationally, and then obviously how we can try and benefit from packaging, using data, understanding what these trends are, and really trying to put our focus on Africa as a destination. So a couple of things that I want to highlight. First, it's a pretty big deal, this whole data and where it comes from and how we are performing with the rest of the world. And you'll see from an African context, over the 1.235 million tourism arrivals, only 58 million are actually landing in Africa, which is quite a big deal. Now, a couple of things that we need to talk about this from a destination marketing point of view. First is, we want to pay attention to what leisure travel is doing, because business travel we have very little control over as destination marketers. Business will continue to do business regardless of what is on trend or what is not on trend, and very often the people who are traveling for business reasons, and they don't really have much choice. They sometimes will extend their stay, sometimes they'll add a day before or after, but the leisure tourists are the ones that we're really interested in, because they're the ones that we as marketers have the opportunity to influence, to get them to consider our destinations and hopefully get them to come. So a couple of key things. 5% of tourist arrivals in the overall scheme of things gives us the best opportunity to grow as Africa as a destination. And it's important to note that in the last couple of years, that growth has been double digit. So it really is starting to become more interesting. At South African Tourism, I was privileged enough to be the head of digital for a couple of years. One of the things that we paid very close attention to was how we are trying to get more of those people who are traveling to consider South Africa from a tourism perspective, which obviously is what any destination marketing organization has to do. But more importantly, it was around how do we get them to think about South Africa? How do we get them to understand that when they've traveled to other places, and this is what the research has shown us, very often the tourists had gone first to the big iconic destinations. They've done the Far East, they've done Europe, they've done the States, and then they're kind of asking what's next. And that's what I want to focus on today, is how do we package Africa as a destination using data really smartly to be able to make us win. So here you can see in this last infographic, this is us at the bottom. So there's obviously a huge amount of improvement that we can go and jump onto. A couple of trends which I think you probably would have picked up on your own already. Globally, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to consider. Tourist and tourism is still one of the growth areas, regardless of massive economic change, and people who have money, who don't have money, travel is still a key part of what they do. But when we focus on Africa, it's important to note that Cape Town remains one of the most aspirational destinations in all of Africa. And this is interesting only because Cape Town has been so good at promoting itself, and the people who go there do a really good job of continuing to promote what Cape Town has to offer and why it's so interesting for people to go. Wildlife and adventure remain key themes in Africa. People, when they travel to Africa or talk about Africa, it is that allure that is very appealing to people, because they've done, as I said before, the Far East, they've done the Europes, they've done the Americas. The next key thing is to look at the expectation for a lot of these international tourists is to have this African experience, but with a first world twist. This is an important thing, because you have to get that really balanced out well for people to want to talk about it, enjoy it, and then come back for more. And then I think the last thing is, there's a really big push for people to connect with causes. Travelers today, when they travel, they don't just want to go and see the mountain, they don't just want to go and have the experience, they actually want to have an enriching experience, a life experience that they can talk about. And these are some of the things that when we don't do really well from a packaging point of view, we miss the opportunity to tug on those heartstrings to make those decisions. So I want to show you something that I think is a really good example of how people are using great content, great media to be able to get people to consider Africa. And I hope that's going to do the right thing. I think we actually do have some audio on this one. I could rap to give you some idea of what you're seeing, but that's just going to spoil it. What's really great about video, and these are one of the key things that we've seen as a theme when it comes to marketing, is that where a picture speaks 1,000 words, video can give you a much better understanding of what a destination has to offer. So video has to be one of the key things that people use more and more to be able to get people to consider their destination. The previous speaker spoke about how the awareness that a destination needs to, or a experience provider needs to be able to get consumers to consider is very important. And often it's not the ad that gets people to decide straight away, it's the ad that gets them to think differently about that destination. And then when it comes to making the decision later on, hopefully you'll still be top of mind for people to be able to choose you. What's great about this content is you'll see in the tips that I'll be giving you in terms of packaging, it really puts people into the experience. So by watching this, you actually, if you're not pulled, if you don't feel that that's something that you want to experience for yourself, it's a missed marketing opportunity. Your communication hasn't been strong enough. Okay, questions. How many of you are familiar with some of those shots that you saw? Right, 1 or 2 hands. So you recognize some of the destinations. How would you describe the feelings that seeing this evokes in you? Just shout out words. Well, this clip is actually purely from drone footage. So it's really, really cool. It's something that's been put together quite recently. But correct. So feeling is an important word. What does it make you feel when you see that? As a spectator. So you don't feel like you, all right. Is it intriguing enough for you to want to then find out more? Sure. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Anyone else make comment? Freedom and adventure. Great. All right. Anything else? Wide open spaces. Inspiring is also a good word. Right, so the reason why I like this piece of communication is because for a lot of people who are thinking about destinations and where to go next, when they're exposed to this kind of communication, very often they kind of go, well, maybe I should dig a little deeper. Maybe I should find out more information. Maybe I should consider this option more. And I think for me, walking from Amsterdam to the train station, from the train station getting off here at Utrecht Central and then walking here, I look at this and I think the weather is a really big deal for people in Europe, and people want to escape poor, bad weather. One of the things that this clip shows us is that you have access to really great weather in Africa. The other thing that I like about it is that it's vast open spaces, and the experiences are varied enough. Everything from walking safaris all the way through to winelands, all the way through to actually getting onto the back of an elephant. So it really gives people the opportunity to explore all these different things that are available to them. And I think that's why, for me, I chose to share this piece of communication with you today. So the challenge from our perspective is, how do we, knowing what we know today, and the previous speaker was talking about fake followers and social media and how we as marketers now have access to be able to find markets and reach markets with communication like never before. I think in the last 10 years as marketers, the tools that are available to us now really give us almost superpowers as marketers to be able to really fine-tune our communication, get it in front of the right audience, and hopefully get them to consider our message. So when we talk about big data and research that we can use to be able to package better, that was one of the challenges put to us when we decided, how do we try and package this talk today? How do we bring that alive? How do we actually give people access to some of the tools or the tips to help them think differently about who they're communicating with and what tools are available for them to do that? So data is data, but the real difference between information and data and intelligence is what we can pull from it. So just information isn't good enough anymore. We've got to be intelligent with the information that we have and how we use that information. And if we're really, really gifted enough as communicators, we can come up with a human insight. And a human insight is one of the few things that marketing is getting right these days. It's something that connects people. It's something that makes me feel like I've been heard and understood, and that the communication resonates with me or is familiar or somehow is actually drawing or tugging at my heartstrings. As marketers, we've always got to remember there are two key things that we need to do. We need to change the perceptions and the thinking and the feelings that people have towards our brand or our offering. And that, from a South African tourism perspective, is one of the key things that we saw happening over and over again. From the time that we launched the Soccer World Cup in 2010 to all of the work that followed that was based on human insight. And the insight that we had as a DMO was that people didn't talk so much about Table Mountain or the winelands or Soweto. They first spoke about meeting the people of South Africa. And that was where the insight came from all the communication that we started to do after that. It was all about what you felt like and how you felt after meeting the people of South Africa, that you would talk to people around first before you talk about the experiences that led to those kind of encounters. So the key thing is to understand the difference between information, intelligence, and insight. So I want to show you just an idea in terms of how we can try and turn on this way of thinking to give us a much better high-resolution image of these consumers that we're trying to get to. So if I look at the information that people know about me from an airline perspective, if you look at my financial services information that people could find, also things like where I've been and what I've been up to, location-based stuff, what hotels and airlines are doing from a CRM point of view. These are all sources of information that we need to be able to use better to be able to glean some intelligence from. And hopefully, it'll lead to some insight. And what I'm going to show you now is that if we do our work right and really well, and we decide who our key audiences are, and we can define them well enough, we can start to communicate far more effectively, and our marketing budget can be spent in a very different way. Rather than trying to get to everybody who is anybody, we can start to narrow it down to actually decide who those key audiences are, what they look like, and how we can communicate best with them, choosing the channels that are most appropriate. So if you look at all of this information, if I look at it from a business point of view, from a business travel perspective, you can see a very one-dimensional view of who I am as a business traveler. But if you start to ask information around my Instagram, if you start to look at what's happening from a Facebook point of view, if you start to understand where I'm searching and what am I searching for, this is where you as marketers start to create this higher resolution picture of who I am as a person. And if you got it right, and I mean really right, you'll understand from a leisure point of view, the people that you need to appeal to is not just me as a business traveler, but you need to understand that I have 4 kids. I like to travel with my mom and my dad and my sister. and that the places that I like to frequent when I'm traveling with them are things like game lodges, outdoor experiences, beach holiday type thing. If we don't go to the effort of trying to understand our consumer, as well as that consumer is actually broadcasting the information available via social media, through their search, with CRM programs, etc., that hotels and OTAs have access to, we are being lazy. We're going to expect to do the same thing that we did last year, but expect different results. The tools that we have available to us today allow us to do far more than just do the same old, same old. So, trying to make it practical for you. How do we make this work from a very simple tips perspective? I've tried to put together 5 that I think are quite relevant, and I hope you'll be able to see some value in these. The dramatic pause is to be able to show that people connect with people. It's a very important thing that gets overlooked very often. So I want you to remember that people connect with people before they connect with places, and they do that through stories. And we've all done this. It's a human thing. We're very good at it. We talk about where we've been and what we're going to do next. We need to understand that that needs to be one of the key things that our marketing needs to be able to do well. The next is to make sure that you don't lose people in the marketing packaging. I don't want to just package for the sake of packaging. Understand that there's a person on the receiving end. What is it that's important to them, and how can we get that working well? Also from a point of view of how do you get that audience to understand and digest the information best. The video that I showed earlier can work really well in Facebook, not so well in Instagram. It can work really well from a YouTube point of view, and it sits well within a website environment. Understand that your content has great places where it works and where it fits, and in other times you're not going to want to have the same content everywhere. And then the last thing is make sure that you can actually allow people in this whole thing of travel and connecting with people to connect and actually have a cultural connection, which is very, very important. So that's why we say humanize before you try and monetize. If your package sitting on your desk, you're about to sign it off, it's a piece of marketing communication, if you can't feel that in some way it can connect with people, it's not a good enough piece of communication. You should start over. So the previous image was of people taking a caravan on camels through the Sahara Desert. It's something that people may have heard of, until they see it, they don't really understand what it's about and how it works. So when you can actually give people life-enriching experiences, in a world today where people don't just want to talk about a McDonald's meal that they've had over and over and over again, they want to talk about the most amazing meal and the experience that was wrapped around that amazing meal. That's what people talk about. That's what people hear, and those are the stories that connect us. That's what gives us this curiosity to want to travel and experience more. Make sure that it actually sits around what you're trying to focus on, around the experience as opposed to the location or the distance or the price. That's not as important. If you can get that experience value proposition properly packaged, that's one of the key things. Make sure that you use big video. Make sure that you can actually try and capture that experience in as beautiful and as attractive a way as possible. And media allows you to do that really well. And make the focal point about the experience itself. It can't just be about Cape Town. It's about the food and the people and the tastes and the smells that you were able to experience in Cape Town and who you shared it with. So it's about the experience. Make sure that you make it all about the experience. It has to be the hero ultimately. The place is important. Place is important because it's one of the things where we get the opportunity to get these unique connections right. People, when they see pictures, very often they want to know where that was taken and what is in the picture. Similarly with video. So if you don't actually localize where the place is, where it takes place, it's not as effective. Make sure that you are adding more than just a pin drop to the actual map, because people add their own meaning to it. So when I've had a penguin experience in Boulders Beach in Cape Town, the way I talk about that experience has got nothing to do with anything other than how it made me feel. If I'm not able to package a deal that will give people some idea of how they will feel, we also need to go back to the drawing board. So make sure that it's the place that actually captures the experience properly. This presentation will be available afterwards, so you can, you don't have to all take photos or anything. Important picture here. This whole image is around a black person who's actually worked with gold dust. So this is really old school mining, and it's still happening in Africa in many places. But again, until you actually contextualize what you're seeing, it gets to miss the point. So important thing around making sure that when you actually are trying to describe an experience, do it in such a way where it's not leading with a price point. If you are trying to convince people to spend money and you haven't done that value proposition really well, price will always be a thing that people debate. But if you give them an option to actually show them that this is a meaningful, valuable, life-changing or life-enriching experience, and you've done that really well, price doesn't really become that big a point for people to debate. So that's why in this trip we're basically talking about price only becomes the problem when value is misunderstood. This is an important thing today. People are willing to spend more on experiences that they think are going to give them more ultimately, as opposed to looking at what's available in their budget and only want to spend what's in their budget. Timing is important. As we heard from the previous speaker, if we don't take the opportunity to get the right message at the right time when people are making those travel decisions, it's just going to be one of those things that sits in the ether, and I'm really not going to pay too much attention to it further than that. When I'm planning my holidays, it's not normally a decision that I get to make on my own, but it has all kinds of other variables to it. And we, from a timing point of view in the travel industry, forget that things happen every single year, like anniversaries. And that's an important thing to consider as well from a tip point of view. When you see your clients that have done certain experiences over and over again, why is it that we are finding it so difficult to often suggest something when we know there's a 25th wedding anniversary coming up or a 50th birthday coming up? We just, again, do what we did the year before. So I challenge you to dig deep into the data that you have available to you. Untapped information and how we can move that from information to intelligence and insights, and how we can connect with people. Those are the things that we really need to be able to take out of this presentation today. So timing is very important. What I want to show you is something that we've been working on in South Africa for Johannesburg. Joburg has been overlooked very often because of the fact that people land there and then they move on to Cape Town, they do the winelands, they do the garden route, they go and do safaris and wildlife experiences. So as a city, Johannesburg is trying to reposition itself in the minds of travelers to be able to get them to stay a couple of days before they fly in or fly out. The only way that they've actually decided to do this is to focus on experience. And that's why the I Am Joburg campaign is quite noteworthy, and I thought I'd share that with you, because it's based on that insight that people are looking for experiences that they can add. Everything that we spoke earlier about the 5 tips to package better, they've started to do really, really well. They're starting to show a culture of cool Johannesburg city life that is vibrant, that is beautiful, that is not the old Ndebele art and drums that people so often still associate with Africa. And I think it's something that we could all learn from, so I've put that in as a reference for you to take a look at. And now if my video would stop playing. Oh, sorry. The channels that they've also chosen to use to get this whole communication around these different experiences out include Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and website. And they've also done a really great campaign recently with Afropunk for the New Year celebrations in Johannesburg, which was really interesting to see how they're using art and culture to galvanize and to bring people together. When people travel, it's about those experiences that include food, music, the experience itself, and the people that they're sharing with. And they've done a really good job of bringing those things together. One of the best quotes that I like to use very often is something that I think marketers lose sight of, and it's really, consumers don't know what they want until you show them. So the challenge I put to you today is to understand your data really well, look for the intelligence that's sitting in there in that information that you already have, try and pick out the insights that you can to be able to understand your audience really, really well, and hopefully you can start to package something that's going to do a much warmer, bigger job of allowing your content to be able to connect to them from the point of view of the pictures that we've seen before. It's about how I put people in that experience. It's about how I share that experience and how I get that experience to them before they are going to make their travel decisions. And that's it. Thank you very much. Question.
Thank you, William. Are there any questions from the audience?
Sure.
In the beginning, you said something about a first world twist.
So there's a difference between a tourist and a traveler. Tourists are people that typically want to leave home and expect the amenities that they're going to be visiting to be better than what they have at home. Travelers are people that they are after the life experience. So if the toilets aren't 100% clean or in exactly the way that they expect to have it back at home, that's not such a big deal for us. Africa, because of the fact that it's becoming so uniquely positioned and people are looking for the rich experience that's different to what they have at home, needs to be considered. So you don't want to put people in a mud hut where the toilets don't work. You want to make sure that you give them the right kind of first world amenities that people would, come to expect and to be comfortable with, and have that happen in a place that is completely unexpected and different to them.
And you need to demonstrate that as well.
That's correct. So remember that there are 3 or 4 different opportunities to communicate. You have the big awareness piece of communication that you can do to get people's attention. And then they start to organize in their own minds their bucket list as to where this opportunity may fit. It may be 2 years from now, 3 years from now that they might end up choosing to come to your destination. When they then start researching your destination and what you have to offer in more detail, that's where that information becomes very important. And then finally, it's around what do my friends and family have to say about their trips to South Africa or to Africa? What did they do? What can I add to my itinerary? What should I avoid? So those are kind of like the 3 levels of decision making that we know we have to try and reinforce each time. So your communication has to, from a timing point of view, have the right information from awareness to consideration and then to final adding more information and booking.
Anyone else? I was wondering, you were talking about collecting data. Are there any tools you can recommend to the people here if they want to start with, collecting their data and
Sure.
that they can start out with?
Cool. I think one of the biggest opportunities that's completely overlooked is the central reservation systems that people are using. So the information that travelers are sharing with the online the online travel agents and the actual guys who are actually doing your reservations for you, that information is available to you. And the guests themselves, if you can give them something that's worth them telling you all of their information for, that's really an opportunity to make a connection that a lot of people don't really do. So people who are getting bookings.com bookings very often don't know the name, email address, or even identity number or passport details, as you've seen before. If you start asking people specifically for that information because you want to follow up, you want to give them a great offer, you want to be able to, you've got to have that value exchange right. People aren't just going to volunteer that information. That's often the most important place to start, and you can use that in Excel, you can use it in any of the reservation systems, depending on how you've categorized things. So the information is available, you actually need to go and dig for it. It's not that easy to find in some instances, but then the question is, what information are you looking for? Understand what's most important and go after that first. You don't want to have piles of data that you can't use because it's not relevant.
For South Africa, which is quite popular, what can you say about the issues of security? Particularly, you say you want to promote Johannesburg, or you or whatever, who wants to promote it.
Sure.
Particularly the place which is, least safe. I think those are important elements also for people to consider.
Absolutely.
Go there or not.
So,
You're not in charge of the security, but those are elements.
no, absolutely. I think it's all around perception. Perception is shaped by a number of different things. Very often it's media in the country around a particular place like Johannesburg or Cape Town that can influence the way people think or feel about a destination. In my experience, I've actually felt more comfortable in Johannesburg than I have in some other cities in South Africa in terms of safety and security. But I think in the travel industry, we like to throw these big excuses around as to why people are not choosing. Very often we haven't asked the right questions and we're quite happy to accept, oh no, they don't want to go to Joburg because it's dangerous. They've never had conversations with people to understand what is it exactly that they fear. Do they fear being hijacked or mugged? Or do they think that if something had to happen, there wasn't enough infrastructure or support or emergency services to help them if something did go wrong? So very often we're quite happy to take whatever excuse people give us as to why they're not booking Johannesburg to say, okay, we've got a problem, let's leave it alone. I think it has to do with understanding what that perception is all about and where it comes from before we can fix it. It is a problem for us.
Right. Before we have lunch, you can rate the speaker at the end of the hall, and after lunch there will be Sven, who's already here, and talking about Inspired by Iceland, the award-winning marketing campaign. So I hope to see you back later. One last round of applause, perhaps, for William Price. Thank you very much. Gift.